I got a pretty extensive story we could talk about if you want to hop into it. How familiar are you, Trinka, with the incidents that happened with Boeing in the recent years, the two crashes and all that?
Yeah. So the only topically with the one plane they had that had like a navigation or a computer problem, and then they've grounded every single model of that plane, and then they've been working on it to try to and then sell those planes back.
Okay, so
Kind of. That's about as much as what I know.
So they had a like merger with another company, so that they had like a co-CEO situation going on, or like a president slash CEO where both of them hold a lot of power, but whatever, the company is split. This caused a lot of the security that were set there to make sure that during the building of the plane that nothing went wrong. These were cut back insanely hard. So you went from having like 14 guys on a line that would check, as the plane was getting built, to 2 is what I think it was. So
Jesus.
so the quality control for what was happening when the plane was getting made was cut down severely. Now, this actually wasn't that big of a problem because the reason why things went wrong had nothing to do with anybody checking at a fail-safe point. What happened was that Airbus had released a plane recently that had a very efficient set of engines on them. And this was going to allow them to have the price point of their ticket much, much lower than like a Boeing plane that was supposed to be efficient. So what Boeing did was take the 737, which is one of their classic planes that has been in their workforce for quite some time, and they were going to modify it to put these bigger engines on it and then be able to do the same thing that Airbus was doing. Now the problem with this is that this was coming down from the top from people that don't understand that you can't just take a plane and just put bigger engines on it. It takes a lot more than that, So the wings needed to be moved back further, all this other stuff, to where it would actually be feasible, right? And what this caused is for the plane to think a lot of the time that it was stalling on ascent, as you're taking off, which would be bad because if the plane thinks it's stalling, it's gonna,
Nosedive.
Exactly. Or even if it's not stalling and it thinks it's stalling, you're gonna think it's stalling, so you might try to correct, right? So they had implemented in a new system called the MCAS, which what it did was it would correct the small amount of stall or whatever that would occur during the ascent from the plane not being perfectly built, right? This is a problem because Boeing wanted to put the plane out extremely fast. So by calling it the 737 MAX and just adding new engines to it, it technically wasn't a new plane, so it didn't have to jump through as many hoops and go through as much red tape to get out there, so they could put it out quicker. And then they just referred to the MCAS as MCAS, and nobody knew what it was, okay? And technically, it was a system that the pilots, if they knew about it, would have had to be trained on before they would ever be able to use a plane, but they weren't. So what happened is the first plane, when I think it was an African Airlines plane, the first one was. I can't remember exactly. I think it was Egypt and Africa.
Conspiracy theory there. Why would they choose that first?
But either way, so what happens is when the plane detects this the stalling on ascent, the MCAS corrects it. Okay. But the problem was they were only using one sensor. And when you have one sensor, you don't have a second sensor to check for a failsafe. Well, that sensor was default. It was faulty. So it was reading that you were always stalling, no matter what you were doing. And the pilots had no idea that the MCAS was even on the plane. So what would happen is they would get 5 seconds of being able to control the plane, and then 10 seconds of the plane thinking it was stalling and pulling its nose down. And then 5 seconds of them having control until you would crash. And there was nothing they could do about it. Now, Boeing said that this was their fault because they should have just shut the MCAS off. But the MCAS was a system that no one was trained on, and unless you read really deep into the manual, you barely even found it. I think it was just on an index page in the back. And the documentary pretty much proves that higher up management would tell you not to put anything in writing that had anything to deal with the MCAS because they didn't want to be able to trace it back because they did not want to have to jump through these hoops to get the plane out. They wanted to get it out as fast as possible. If anybody would have learned that this was a new system, it would have been a problem. So before the plane crashed, before they found the black box after the plane crashed, though, they were still blaming it on the pilots, saying the pilots just fucked something up and it couldn't have been our plane, right? That was also a lie because they found the black box and they found out it was absolutely the MCAS. The pilots could do nothing. The plane was going to crash when it took off, no matter who was in the in the pilot seat. It would never have made it to its destination. So, the second plane that this happened to, these pilots happened to be trained on the MCAS, so they knew what to do if it started messing up, and they shut it off. And then it just turned itself back on and did the same thing anyway. So, yeah.
Because then they think they've shut it off, so they're not going to go back to it.
No,
probably.
and so what you needed to realize... No, I think actually what had happened was by the time they shut it off, I don't know if it turned back on. I think it actually what happened now that I remember. By the time they shut it off, it was too late. They were already in such a steep angle downward, they were never going to be able to come back up before they hit the ground. And they only had I think the guy did the timing for it, and the thing was 6 seconds you would have had to realize that if you didn't shut it off within 6 seconds of it starting to happen, the plane was going to crash no matter what you did.
And all of what I'm getting from this instantly is all of this was done, right? You said the first reason they did it is because Airbus was going to undercut their price.
Yes.
So they went through all of this just to save some money on their tickets and compete with another company.
Yep.
They cut all these corners, rushed it out.
Yep. And it was because
there you go.
And it was because of the merger. The old philosophy of Boeing would have never done that. They would have just made a new plane. That's what everybody in the company wanted to do. Like the actual engineers, all the people on the line, maybe even some of the higher ups from the other side of management, not the new people coming in. But the new people coming in were running the company as a business, not as a... you have to run
safety first when so many people's lives
with
are
aircraft and in transportation, and they were not thinking of it that way. They were cutting corners wherever they could.
That brings up an interesting argument to. So we all say competition is good for economics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Competition is good between companies. It drives prices down. It spurs innovation, all that kind of stuff. But it also leads to things like this, right? You're competing just to compete, so you don't get knocked out, and you might cut corners because if you don't compete. And if you don't get this thing out, you're going to fail and you're going to lose your company. So, but then the flip side of that coin is always, regulation.
Yeah.
So, and then there's that balance that everybody always talks about. Well, free market versus too much regulation. Where's the line? Some people want no regulation. Some people want a ton. So, but in this point, there was a ton of regulation. It's an airline industry.
But that's what he mentioned too. Some reason, they were able to cut back on their inspection team massively.
So here's the thing. Anything that they did not put in writing, so it couldn't be traced back that they were doing it. So if any company came in with regulations, it would be like a showboat day where they would have more people there and make it look like they were. Why lie when there's a black box on the plane that they're gonna find and it's gonna tell you everything that fucking happened? That's where it blows me out. Why lie?